Have you ever looked down at the dirt beneath your boots and wondered what secrets it holds in its microscopic embrace? To the vast majority of us, the ground is simply dust and grime, or perhaps a nuisance to be swept away from our floors. However, to a forensic geologist, the soil is a silent witness that never forgets and never lies. It creates a complex map of everywhere we have been and everything we have done. In the annals of true crime history, there are few cases that demonstrate this power as vividly as the baffling disappearance of a brewing heir in the desolate foothills of the Rocky Mountains. This is a story where the earth itself rose up to testify against a killer who thought he had committed the perfect crime. The year was 1960, and the location was the rugged and beautiful landscape of Morrison, Colorado. The morning of February 9th began like any other for Adolph Coors III, who was the grandson of the legendary brewery founder and the chairman of the board for the Golden-based company. Known to his friends and family simply as Ad, he was a man of routine and punctuality. He left his sprawling ranch house early that morning, kissing his wife and children goodbye before climbing into his station wagon. The drive to the brewery was a route he had taken thousands of times, winding through the quiet isolation of Turkey Creek Canyon. He had no reason to suspect that this familiar journey would be his last. Adolph Coors III was a man who seemed to have everything a person could desire, including wealth and a loving family and a respected position in the community. Despite his high status, he was known for being down to earth and approachable. He did not travel with bodyguards or an entourage, preferring the solitude of his morning commute. This predictability was a fatal flaw that had been observed by a predator watching from the shadows. As his vehicle approached a narrow wooden bridge, a trap that had been carefully laid out days in advance was about to spring shut. The silence of the canyon was about to be shattered not by the noise of industry, but by the sudden violence of a meticulously planned abduction. A milk truck driver making his daily rounds was the first person to stumble upon the eerie scene at the bridge. He found the station wagon belonging to Adolph Coors, blocking the single-lane road with its engine, still purring softly in the cold mountain air. The radio was playing a morning broadcast to an empty cabin. The driver stepped out of his truck and approached the vehicle expecting to find a mechanical failure or a flat tire. Instead, he found a chilling void. The driver's side door was open, and a hat belonging to the missing man lay on the ground nearby. But it was the reddish-brown stain on the bridge railing that sent a shiver of dread down his spine. Law enforcement officers from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office arrived swiftly to secure the scene. They found signs of a struggle, but no body. The blood-stained railing and the abandoned car painted a grim picture of a kidnapping gone wrong, or perhaps a cold-blooded murder. The sheer silence of the canyon felt heavy with unsaid words. Investigators combed the area for footprints or tire tracks, but the dry winter ground was unyielding. They found a pair of glasses that Adolph was known to wear, and a granite rock that appeared to have blood on it. The initial theory was immediate and terrifying. This was a targeted strike against one of the most prominent families in the United States. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was called in almost immediately due to the presumption of kidnapping. A massive manhunt was launched covering the rugged terrain of the Colorado foothills. Agents and volunteers scoured the ravines and abandoned mines that dotted the landscape, hoping to find the brewing heir alive. The Coors family waited by the telephone in an agonizing vigil, praying for a ransom call that would give them a direction. The press descended on the small town, turning the disappearance into a national sensation. Every hour that passed without contact from the abductors diminished the hope of finding Adolph alive. The silence from the kidnappers was deafening and unusual for a crime motivated by money. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation seemed to be hitting a solid wall of frustration. Then a ransom note finally arrived. It was mailed from barely 20 miles away and demanded a staggering sum of $500,000 in small bills. The instructions were specific and warned against involving the police. However, the note provided no proof of life. The writing was jagged and hurried. The Federal Bureau of Investigation analyzed the handwriting and the paper, but it offered few immediate leads. The family prepared the money desperate to comply, but the kidnappers never called with the final drop-off instructions. The trail went cold again, leaving investigators with nothing but a silent phone and a missing man. The breakthrough came not from the ransom note, but from a vigilant citizen who reported seeing a suspicious vehicle in the area days before the disappearance. The witness described a bright yellow Mercury sedan that had been parked near the bridge on several occasions. It was a distinctive car for such a rural area. Detectives latched onto this lead and began tracing the ownership of every yellow Mercury in the region. Their search led them to a man named Walter Osborne, who had recently moved out of his Denver apartment in a hurry, leaving behind a mess of belongings. The name Walter Osborne turned out to be a pseudonym for a much more dangerous individual. Investigators discovered that Walter Osborne was actually Joseph Corbett Jr., a fugitive who had escaped from a prison in California, where he was serving time for murder. Corbett was a man of high intelligence and obsessive planning. He had been living under the radar in Colorado, working quietly and keeping to himself. The realization that an escaped killer had been stalking Adolph Coors shifted the tone of the investigation from a kidnapping rescue to a hunt for a murderer. The Federal Bureau of Investigation placed Corbett on the 10 most wanted list, triggering a nationwide search. But Corbett had a significant head start, and he was known for his ability to blend into the background. The yellow Mercury was eventually located thousands of miles away in Atlantic City, New Jersey. It had been set on fire in a clumsy attempt to destroy evidence. The interior was charred and gutted by the flames, making traditional fingerprinting difficult. However, the fire had not consumed everything. Under the wheel wells and packed into the undercarriage was a thick layer of dried mud and dirt. To the average observer, it was just road grime. To the specialized team of forensic scientists gathering around the wreck, it was a geological diary of the car's travels. This dirt would become the most critical evidence in the entire case. Forensic geology was a relatively new field in 1960, and it was rarely used as the primary evidence in a capital case. The principle is that soil is not uniform. It varies wildly in mineral composition and pollen content and chemical structure from 1 mile to the next. The dirt in Colorado is distinct from the dirt in New Jersey or Illinois. If investigators could prove that the soil on the yellow Mercury came specifically from the dirt road where Adolph Coors was abducted, they could link Corbett to the crime scene definitively. They scraped 4 separate samples from the wheel wells and sent them to the laboratory for microscopic analysis. The task of analyzing the soil fell to a team of expert geologists who understood the unique lithology of the Rocky Mountains. They placed the samples under high-powered microscopes and began to catalog the minerals found within. They were looking for a specific signature. The area around Turkey Creek Canyon was rich in pink feldspar and quartz and mica. It was a geological fingerprint that was unique to that specific drainage area. As they peered through the lenses, they found exactly what they were hoping for. The minerals in the wheel wells of the burnt car in New Jersey matched the minerals from the crime scene in Colorado perfectly. But the soil told a story that went beyond just the abduction site. The layers of dirt on the car were deposited chronologically like the rings of a tree. By carefully dissecting the layers, the geologists could trace the movements of the car after the crime. They found a layer of soil that did not match the bridge or the road to Denver. This particular layer contained distinct particles indicative of a different elevation and a different type of vegetation. This suggested that after the abduction, Corbett had driven to a remote location to dispose of the body. The dirt was giving them a map to the remains of Adolph Coors. Using the geological profile created from the suspect vehicle, investigators narrowed down the search area to a specific region south of Denver, near a place called Sedalia. The soil profile suggested a dump site that was off the main road, likely a dirt track used by locals. Search parties were redirected to this new zone. They combed through the scrub oak and pine forests, their eyes scanning the ground for any disturbance. It was a needle in a haystack operation, but the science had made the haystack significantly smaller. The conviction that they were looking in the right place was bolstered by the unshakable testimony of the minerals. 7 long months after the disappearance, the tragic confirmation finally arrived. A hiker wandering through a remote dumping ground near Sedalia stumbled upon the skeletal remains of a man. The clothing matched the description of what Adolph Coors was wearing on the day he vanished. The location was exactly within the radius predicted by the soil analysis. It was a somber moment for the family and the community, but it was a triumph for forensic science. The discovery of the body turned a missing persons case into a confirmed homicide, and it provided the physical evidence needed to build a capital murder case against Joseph Corbett. The recovery of the remains allowed for further geological comparisons. Investigators took soil samples from the shallow grave where the body was found and compared them to the innermost layer of dirt on the yellow mercury. The match was undeniable. The car had been at the bridge where the abduction occurred, and it had been at the dump site where the body was left. The probability of a random vehicle picking up those 2 specific soil types in that specific order by chance was astronomically low. The Earth had effectively placed Joseph Corbett at both scenes of the crime. While the forensic evidence was being solidified, the manhunt for Joseph Corbett continued. He was a slippery fugitive moving between states and using aliases. He was eventually tracked down to a boarding house in Vancouver, British Columbia. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police moved in and arrested him without incident. Corbett was extradited back to the United States to stand trial for the murder of Adolph Coors III. He remained stoic and arrogant, believing that, without a witness to the actual killing, the prosecution would struggle to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The trial of Joseph Corbett Jr. was a media circus drawing reporters from all over the country. The prosecution had a mountain of circumstantial evidence, but their star witness was not a person who saw the crime. It was the science of geology. When the forensic experts took the stand, they explained the complex mineralogy to the jury in simple terms. They showed charts and magnified photographs of the sand grains. They explained how the pink feldspar from the bridge and the unique clay from the dump site were found on the defendant's car. It was a masterclass in scientific deduction that captivated the courtroom. Corbett sat silently throughout the proceedings, watching the case against him build grain by grain. His defense team tried to argue that dirt is just dirt and that a car could pick up mud from anywhere. But the specificity of the mineral composition was hard to refute. The prosecution presented the soil samples as an unforgeable signature. They argued that the yellow mercury was the vessel of death, and the soil was the passenger that saw everything. The jury listened, intently realizing that the ground they walked on was more unique than they had ever imagined. Beyond the soil, the prosecution also presented the ransom note and the typewriter recovered from Corbett's possession. But it was the soil that linked the physical movements of the killer to the victim. The timeline established by the layers of dirt in the wheel wells matched the timeline of the police theory perfectly. It showed the drive to the bridge, the drive to the dump site, and the drive out of the state. The narrative was cohesive and damning. The jury did not need a smoking gun when they had the very earth from the crime scene testifying against the defendant. The deliberations were tense, but the verdict was decisive. Joseph Corbett Jr. was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted as the sentence was read. He was sentenced to life in imprisonment, escaping the death penalty, only because the jury could not agree on the punishment. The Coors family finally had justice for the loss of their husband and father. The man who thought he could outsmart the Federal Bureau of Investigation and vanish into the crowd had been undone by the mud on his tires. It was a landmark victory for law enforcement. The conviction of Joseph Corbett Jr. marked a turning point in criminal investigation. Before this case, forensic geology was often seen as a secondary or supporting tool. The Coors kidnapping proved that it could be the primary evidence that ties a suspect to a crime. It validated the work of scientists who spent their lives studying rocks and minerals, showing that their knowledge had practical and profound applications in the pursuit of justice. Police departments across the country began to pay more attention to the dirt found on suspects' shoes and vehicles. Joseph Corbett Jr. maintained his silence for decades, serving his time in the Colorado State Penitentiary. He was a model prisoner who worked in the library and kept to himself. He was eventually released on parole in 1980 at the age of 51. He lived out the rest of his life in relative obscurity, never publicly admitting to the crime or expressing remorse. The mystery of his exact motives and the details of the final moments of Adolph Coors died with him. But the evidence that convicted him remains a matter of public record. The legacy of the Coors case extends far beyond the tragedy of one family. It revolutionized the way crime scenes are processed. Today, investigators are trained to collect soil samples as a matter of routine. They understand that pollen and spores and mineral dust can track a suspect across continents. The techniques developed and refined during the hunt for Adolph Coors are now standard practice in forensic laboratories around the world. Every time a killer is caught, because of the mud on their boots, they have the investigators of 1960 to thank. The bridge at Turkey Creek is quiet now. The wooden structure has been replaced and the road is paved, but the landscape remains largely unchanged. The pink feldspar and the quartz still crumble from the canyon walls, mixing with the dust of the road. It is a beautiful and rugged place that hides its dark history well. But for those who know the story, the ground there feels different. It is a place where the silence was broken not by a confession, but by the scientific interrogation of the earth itself. Adolph Coors III is remembered not just as a victim, but as a man whose death advanced the cause of justice. His name is forever linked to a case that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in forensic science. The brewery he was set to lead continued to grow, and his family carried on his legacy. But the impact of his case is found in the textbooks of forensic geology and in the training manuals of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It serves as a grim reminder that no matter how careful a criminal may be, they cannot escape the physical world they inhabit. The story of the soil samples is also a testament to human ingenuity and persistence. It highlights the dedication of the investigators who refused to give up when the trail went cold. They looked at a burnt-out car and saw not a dead end, but a library of information. They looked at a handful of dirt and saw a map. It is a celebration of the scientific mind that seeks truth in the smallest of details. In a world of chaos and violence, science offers a path to order and accountability. As we reflect on this baffling disappearance, we are reminded of the fragility of life and the endurance of truth. The perfect crime is a myth because every action leaves a trace. We leave a part of ourselves wherever we go, and we take a part of the world with us. For Joseph Corbett, that part of the world was the mud from Turkey Creek, and it was a burden he could not shake. It clung to his vehicle like a ghost, pointing an accusatory finger directly at him across thousands of miles. So the next time you brush the dirt off your jacket or kick the mud from your shoes, take a moment to consider what you are removing. You are not just cleaning away filth. You are erasing a record of your journey. You are destroying a microscopic history of where you have been. In the world of forensic science, that dust is more valuable than gold. It is the silent witness that speaks for the dead and ensures that the guilty have nowhere to hide. The case of Adolph Coors III stands as a monumental pillar in the history of true crime. It bridges the gap between old-fashioned detective work and modern scientific analysis. It reminds us that justice can be found in the most unlikely of places, even in the tread of a tire or the wheel well of a getaway car. The Earth remembers what happened that day in 1960, and thanks to the tireless work of those forensic pioneers, the world remembers too.